Welcome back to Occupy Democrats, and in this breaking story, we may as well call Donald Trump by the name he really deserves. Mussolini, Chiang Kai-shek, pick anything that you would like. Certainly Vladimir Putin comes to mind. Because the truth of the matter is, we're not on the way to fascism and being under dictatorial rule. Oh, no. In this breaking story, we're already in it. We can skip the "we're on the way to it" when you see what the Supreme Court just did. I'm going to show this story to you in just a few seconds. Take a quick listen to this sound about SCOTUS and what federal judges in the lower courts have had to say. This.
On the beef between the Supreme Court and some federal judges. In very rare interviews, 10 of them tell our Lawrence Hurley they're frustrated with the Supreme Court for overturning rulings that went against the White House with little or no explanation. One judge even alleging that the Supreme Court, which of course includes 3 Trump nominees, is throwing them under the bus. Another says the high court is trying to make it look like the lower courts are biased against the president, telling us it is inexcusable. They don't have our backs. In the big picture here, the Supreme Court has granted the Trump administration request to block lower court rulings in more than 70% of its emergency cases brought by the administration.
And of course, dictator Donnie responded with this.
President Trump is asking the Supreme Court to step in to rule on his tariffs. And this is why a lower court ruled last week that most of them were illegal. Trump argues he has the power to bypass Congress and tax foreign goods, saying the money helps the economy.
Because the lower courts were doing their job in the 3 branches of government, which is supposed to be checks and balances. This.
After Trump faced a stinging week of pushback from the lower courts on a number of his controversial policies, it's expected that he will take his grievances to the conservative majority Supreme Court in an effort to overturn those rulings.
But oh no, deranged dictator Donald has decided that not only is Pam Bondi his personal lawyer and not the Attorney General for the U.S., but the Supreme Court is also just like everyone in his life, and how his daddy taught him to be a dictator. They should be in his back pocket too. This.
Well, we've got breaking news out of Washington. Megan Casella has a story for us. Hi, Megan.
Hey, Morgan. So the Trump administration is back before the Supreme Court for the second time today, this time petitioning the high court to allow the president to move forward with his firing of the Democratic commissioner on the FTC, Rebecca Kelly Slaughter. Remember, the president moved to fire her first back in March, and just this week on Tuesday, a federal appeals court had ruled that she was allowed to return to work, that firing was not within the president's authority. Now the Trump administration, the Solicitor General John Sauer, back before the Supreme Court, asking for 2 things, asking for Slaughter's immediate removal in the meantime, and also asking them to fully review this case and to issue the definitive ruling.
So in this breaking story, the conservative justices on SCOTUS aren't even hiding it anymore at all. They're just handing him decisions without any explanation whatsoever. Holy smokes, here is the story. Breaking news, Supreme Court gives no explanation as it hands Trump another win. The U.S. Supreme Court handed President Donald Trump another legal win Monday without explaining its decision. The court has frozen lower court rulings to allow so-called, in quotes, roving immigration patrols in California, with all 6 conservatives ruling in the administration's favor and 3 liberal justices dissenting, reported NBC News. The justices offered no explanation for the decision aside from a solo concurrence by Justice Brett Kavanaugh and a dissent written by Justice Sonya Sotomayor. Kavanaugh cited 2 previous immigration cases where the court held that lower courts lacked the authority to block immigration policies by Joe Biden's administration. But Georgetown law professor Steve Vladeck pointed out the court had denied the government's emergency applications in each of those cases, in quotes. Especially in an immigration case like this one, it is also important to stress the proper role of the judiciary, Kavanaugh wrote. The judiciary does not set immigration policy or decide enforcement priorities. Sotomayor harshly criticized the majority's decision, in quotes. We should not have to live in a country where the government can seize anyone who looks Latino, speaks Spanish, and appears to work in a low-wage job, she wrote, rather than stand idly by while our constitutional freedoms are lost. I dissent. Supreme Court Justice Sonya Sotomayor condemned her conservative colleagues for allowing the Donald Trump administration to continue to make immigration stops based on racial profiling. Sotomayor took issue with Justice Brett Kavanaugh's reasoning made in his brief concurrence and said his arguments ignored reality. In quotes, "It is the people of Los Angeles and the Central District who will suffer from this court's grant of relief to the government," she wrote. "Immigration agents are not conducting brief stops for questioning, as the concurrence would like to believe. They're seizing people using firearms, physical violence, and warehouse detentions." Sotomayor continued, "Nor are undocumented immigrants the only ones harmed by the government's conduct," Sotomayor added. "United States citizens are also being seized, taken from their jobs, and prevented from working to support themselves and their family. The concurrence relegates the interest of the U.S. citizens and individuals' legal status to a single sentence, posting that the government will free these individuals as soon as they can show they are legally in the United States. That blinks reality. Two plaintiffs in this very case tried to explain they are U.S. citizens. One was then pushed against a fence with his arm twisted behind his back, and the other was taken away from his job to a warehouse for further questioning. The justice noted that Kavanaugh's reasoning seemed to shift the administrative burden from the government to individuals." In quotes, "It is the government's burden to prove that it has reasonable suspicion to stop someone," she wrote. "The concurrence improperly shifts the burden onto an entire class of citizens to carry enough documentation to prove that they deserve to walk freely. The Constitution does not permit the creation of such second-class citizenship status. The equities therefore lie with the plaintiffs. Countless people in the Los Angeles area have been grabbed, thrown to the ground, and handcuffed simply because of their looks, their accents, and the fact they make a living by doing manual labor. Today, the court needlessly subjects countless more to these exact same indignities." Sotomayor then assailed the right wing's majority growing reliance on emergency applications to rule in Trump's favor. In quotes, "The court's order is troubling for another reason. It is entirely unexplained," she wrote. "In the last 8 months, this court's appetite to circumvent the ordinary appellate process and weigh in on important issues has grown exponentially. There may be good justification for issuing an unreasoned order in some circumstance, yet some situations simply cry out for an explanation, such as when the government's conduct flagrantly violates the law, or when lower courts and litigants need guidance about the issues on which they should focus. The ruling violated a fundamental right laid out in the Bill of Rights," the justice argued. In quotes, "The Fourth Amendment protects every individual's constitutional right to be free from arbitrary interference by law officers," Sotomayor wrote. "After today, that may no longer be true for those who happen to look a certain way, speak a certain way, and appear to work a certain type of legitimate job that pays very little, because this is unconscionably irreconcilable with our nation's constitutional guarantees. I dissent." The saddest part for Sotomayor's wonderful dissent and accurate dissent is it doesn't matter. And while I could sit around, and I do commonly in my own life, blame Donald Trump for a lot of things, the truth of the matter is we the people are responsible. Voted for him not once, but twice, despite all of the felony counts, despite the impeachments. I still blame we the people, and I also blame Merrick Garland, Mitch McConnell, Joe Biden, and yes, in many, many ways, I also blame Ruth Bader Ginsburg, who's a wonderful human being, but she should have gotten out of the way while we still had the ability to replace her with somebody who had a less severe right mentality. And now, this is what we have. We're stuck with this, and we are on the edge. I mean the edge of the point of no return. I'm not being sensational. I'm sharing with you that is where we are. So in the meantime, you guys, stay frosty.